it's a great pleasure to have Amanda Claridge from Royal Holloway here, who is surely one of the people who knows more about Rome than probably the rest of us put together. And she is going to take us on a nice little trip through the Villas of Tiberius. So we're looking forward to that.
Thank you. Can you all hear if I speak like that? Good. Yes, this is a topic that was given to me, as it were. I was just told, would you talk about the Villas of Tiberius? And I said, I don't know anything about the Villas of Tiberius, but okay, I'll give it a whirl. And rather like Peter, who was saying, when you start looking from the perspective of Tiberius as opposed to looking at Augustus forward, and you look at Tiberius back at what Augustus had left him, this became more and more interesting to me. But, right. Probably like the rest of you, my idea of Villas of Tiberius was essentially Capri and the Villa Jovis, the so-called Villa of Jupiter, which is on the point, as you can see up there. So there is the island of Capri. This is the Villa of Jupiter. This is the Sorrento Peninsula in the background. And this apparent isolation on the top of the hilltop just fits into everything we hear about in our sources about Tiberius simply giving up, rightly sort of signing off, and off he goes to Capri. After 12 years of rule, he leaves Rome and he never goes back again. So of his 23 years of rule, he spends over half, or just about half of it, on Capri. Why he went to Capri, we get quite a lot of suggestions in our literary sources about his reasons. One of them we've heard already, that he just couldn't stand Livia any longer, and he really just had to go, get out of Rome, get away from her. We've just heard again that another possible reason that he really, if he'd had any sense, having expressed some of the views he did about the populares, that might well be the end of him if he stayed any longer. If relations with the Roman people got to crisis point, he would probably be assassinated quickly. Safest place to be was Capri. And then, of course, Suetonius tells us about all his other ghastly sexual depravities, which, of course, could be exercised so much better on Capri than they could be on the Palatine. And then the other one I seem to remember, there's quite a number of them, isn't there? The other thing is that he was ashamed of his appearance. And that's another interesting parallel with Hadrian, who was thought to be ashamed of his appearance, hence he wears a beard. Hadrian is another emperor who goes and lives in his villa rather than staying in Rome and on the Palatine. So the choice of Capri is not only, well, those reasons presumably might have contributed, we have no idea, but it is striking to me as an archaeologist, really, rather than an ancient historian, to be clear that I don't really know the ancient sources as well as lots of you do. But just looking at the sort of geography and material aspects of Tiberius's retreat, what he's chosen in Capri might seem very isolated if you just look at the Villa of Jupiter on its point, but actually Capri down here is fantastically, strategically located on the routes accessing the Bay of Naples and the whole approach to Rome. So this is all the ships that are coming in from the eastern Mediterranean with all the grain, the wheat, the supplies, everything that's keeping the elite lifestyle of Rome and imperial power in place, comes up pretty well from the Straits of Messina up across to the Bay of Naples, to Puteoli, the great port of Rome, past Capri. And Capri has a lighthouse on it and is within a mere 4 hours by fast rowing by boat across to Misenum, and can be connected with the whole of the Bay of Naples, actually, quite easily. So he might have had other reasons to choose Capri. It was already imperial power. It was already an imperial property. Augustus, Caesar had sort of exchanged it with Naples. Naples actually owned Capri, but Augustus agreed to give them Ischia, Ainaria, over there, modern Ischia, in exchange. Why he wanted it was only a sort of strange story about a tree, an oak tree, regenerating suddenly when he visited on his way back from Actium. He stopped off on Capri, and there was this phenomenon that happened that an apparently dead oak tree sprang into life, and Caesar decided to take the island for himself, or at least he then negotiated with Naples to give them Ischia, Ainaria. He'd probably had that. I don't know if we know how he had it in his possession to be able to give Naples Ischia in exchange for Capri. I don't know how that works, but I understand that Ischia had probably come into public ownership of Rome around about the time of the Social War under Sulla. You could tell me all those sorts of aspects of this. Okay, so you could say that all he's doing is he's revisiting his marvellous quiet time when, in fact, in a very similar position on Rhodes when he was exiled, self-imposed exile, essentially. There's Rhodes and southwest Turkey. He retreated to the city of Rhodes and had a relatively modest townhouse, apparently, and a suburban villa outside it. So he lived the lifestyle of the Roman aristocratic man of power, but away from Rome already for 8 years, from 6 BC until AD 2, the difficult time when he wasn't sure what Augustus was going to do with Gaius and Lucius, apparently, according to the sources. It was his own position was potentially dangerous, that he might well get simply bumped off again, and he asked to retreat, get away from Rome and just stay out of the picture and give Gaius and Lucius a chance to become consolidated in the city. He goes back to Rome, and in AD 2, his whole exile story sounds very interesting, that he sort of misjudges, by the sound of it, Augustus's attitude to him, and Augustus is not prepared really to countenance his retreating to Rhodes. On the other hand, once he's there, he says, well, you went away, I'm not going to let you back again, because for some reason or other Tiberius thinks he's got to ask for permission to return to Rome. But yes, Tiberius was born in Rome. He was definitely a Roman, as we've heard. He's of the older established aristocracy. He was born on the Palatine, as far as we know. There's an alternative story that he was born on Livia's maternal estate at Fundi, which we'll see in a minute, but I think the general idea is that he was actually born on the Palatine in that great complex of elite aristocratic Roman housing that took over the Palatine in the course of the last 2 centuries BC, especially in the 1st century BC. Lots of the main leading families actually do occupy most of the Palatine Hill, and that, of course, is where Augustus Caesar sets up his own house the minute he's pretty confident of power. He takes over the old house of Hortensius that everybody's been wanting to get her hands on. He gets it around about 40 or 38 BC, and that is where he establishes his own nascent Palatine palace. This is the core of the palace. And I know Peter thinks that they're all quite small houses, but they're presumably big of their type, and so they could serve as the centre of administration for the Palatine system of the Principate, where you've got this whole alternative bureaucracy that has to grow up in order to administer this enormous amount of wealth and property and activities that the Princeps actually undertakes. Now, Tiberius had been brought up by, he's about 4 years old, I think, when Augustus marries Livia, isn't he? So he's brought up, plus Drusus, in the house of Augustus and Livia, and then after he takes the toga virilis and so on, he has to, and gets married to Vipsania, Yep, right. He gets married to the Vixamia. He must set up his own house, and by the sound of it, he sets up on the Carinae, off the Palatine, over here on the end of the Esquiline. When he comes back from Rhodes, so he moves and goes and lives right on the outskirts of the city in the gardens of Maecenas. So he's nothing to do with the Palatine. He's keeping away from that sort of core of the city. On the Palatine, I think we're in a very interesting period now where we're beginning to see the problems with the identification of the temple of, the house of Augustus as we've known it since the 1950s or 60s, and the so-called House of Livia too, both of which are in, I don't know if you can see this at all actually, but let's see what the next one's like. Yeah, do it in graphics. This is the big Domitianic Flavian palace, and as Peter Wiseman said, the expectation is growing now that we should take it at face value. When it was called the Domus Augustana or Augustiana, and the other part here is called the Domus Tiberiana, they reflect original parts of the Augustan palace on the one hand and Tiberius's palace on the other. When Augustus takes over the house of Hortensius, the very likely it is that he chose it because it had a view of the Romulan monuments of the Palatine. There were these three very important relics. We don't know how old they were, how real they were, but there were these relics of Romulus's foundation of the city of Rome on the Palatine Hill. And one of them's called Roma Quadrata, one of them's called the Auguraculum, and there's also the hut of Faustulus. And they're all Romulus's foster father. And they're all within view of the house of Hortensius. And Augustus lives in that house until AD 3. It burns down and he replaces it. And then it becomes the house of Augustus. Before AD 3, when it burns, and he then rebuilds it. It can't really be his house. He didn't build it, so it hasn't got his name. It's still called the house of Hortensius. After AD 3, it becomes Augustus's house. And it becomes completely public property. So prior to that, part of it had been public property since 12 BC when he became Pontifex Maximus. And instead of moving down to the house of the Domus Publica down by the Forum, he makes part of his house Domus Publica. After AD 3, he makes it all Domus Publica. So what Tiberius inherited in AD 14 was a brand new, spanking new palace that had the name of Augustus to it. And just that, rather like Augustus, when he came to power, the first thing he does is build himself a house. I imagine that Tiberius set about establishing his alternative place. He wouldn't want to live in a Domus Publica if he's the sort of person we know about. He might definitely do his public duties there, but he's not going to want to actually live in it on public show in the way that Augustus was apparently quite happy to do. And I'm fascinated by the fact that we also have this story of him and Livia falling out over the administration of the house she was living in. Now, she's presumably not living in Augustus's new house. She is presumably living in another house, which could be her own family house. That's one of the stories that were given, is that it's one that she had had in her family since a long time past. The Livii Drusi have a house on the Palatine. Tiberius Claudius Nero may well have had a house on the Palatine. We know that Antony and Caesar and everybody else does too. So there could be lots of houses around where she could have, after Augustus's death, as dowager, moved and just simply decided to set up house on her own. But I wonder with Tiberius whether in fact it was decided because of her power with him that she insisted upon sharing the new house, or building a new house, which she and he could share. Because there's some quaint stories where there's a water pipe from a villa at Frescati, which is actually inscribed Tiberius Caesar et Julia Augusta, and as if they actually own property together. Do we know whether Augustus's will, when he left 2/3 to Tiberius and 1/3 to Livia, perhaps somehow or other it was also on condition that they actually share the existing palatial properties on the Palatine, and that somehow or other they ended up having to share a house, and that's what really got to him. It was not, she wanted to manage that, so he just says, okay, you manage the house, because she wanted to invite the Senate to dinner one time, I think, and was doing all sorts of things where he ought to have been the host, and she's doing it instead. There's a dinner party she wants to host for, is it something to do with the Temple of Augustus or something, which is being celebrated. Anyhow, so as I say, I think there's a lot of backstory with the whole escape to Capri, which we perhaps have quite, with any luck, as and when the whole of the topography around the Temple of Apollo in particular gets sorted. Because if we suppose that there is the Temple of Apollo, and I want to turn it, as some of you may know, I want to turn it round the other way so it looks into the hill, because that seems to strike me as a logical thing for a temple on a major hill in Rome to do, just like the Temple of Jupiter does and so on. That if the Temple of Apollo is facing this way and the House of Augustus is on that side, we know that the House of Tiberius is somewhere on this position here. And so I wonder if this is the house of Tiberius and Julia Augusta, which then in the sources just simply becomes just Tiberius in due course. It doesn't remain Julia's, certainly after her death. Probably one of the first things Tiberius does is stop calling it the house of Julia Augusta. Anyhow, I think that the auguraculum cum vestibulum of the house of Augustus and the Roma Quadrata and the house of Faustulus are all in this space here, which I think is what we should call the auguraculum, and that Augustus's house looks out onto that, the Temple of Apollo looks out onto that. Tiberius then revamps and rebuilds or makes a new palace here on the opposite side of this same space, and then the rest of the palace just simply expands around that. The nucleus is basically set right from AD 14, slightly afterwards, and that the Temple of Apollo, its precinct is where the Senate and people of Rome come to see Augustus, 6,000 of them. There's a very big precinct there where they can all spread out. The Senate comes and meets up here. Augustus installs a curia on the Palatine for the Senate to come and meet. It's often said to be these tiny library type structures, but I think there's actually a curia which is in the palace, which we've got a room, which we've got 3 phases of it in the Claudian, perhaps Neronian period and Domitianic period definitely, but there's a 3rd phase which is underlying all that, and that is probably the curia for the Palatine. So the Senate came up and had their own curia up on the Palatine. So there's a sort of second forum of Rome which develops up on the Palatine, and where public life revolves around the real domus publica of the emperor, plus all the satellite residences of all the rest of the family round about them. And this is what Tiberius is trying to get away from. I think this is why he sticks it for 10 years or 12 years, because that's what Augustus did in the last 10 years of his life. He was largely in Rome, administering justice, doing all the traditional aristocratic things, doing the right, proper duties of a princeps. Tiberius does it, puts up with it, even with the horror of Livia on his back all the time. He sticks it out, and then eventually everything begins to crack. He can't take it any longer. He's already 44 when he comes to power. He's 56 or 54 or something when he goes off to Capri. He's getting old. He says he wants to retire. But there's also another part of it. He still can't let loose all the reins of government, so he's got to choose where he's going to go. He wants to get out of Rome, but where is he going to go? What's the best place? Now, sorry, that's the Temple of Apollo, which I finally put in. Yeah, he could go anywhere around Rome. Hadrian does. Hadrian goes out to Tibur. Augustus quite often used to go out into his country villas. He can administer the Roman Empire from wherever he is. He's got his staff with him. He can move around. The Senate can't. The Senate's fixed. It has to be in Rome. But there's no reason why the princeps can't move. And so he starts moving. And I say quite a lot of letters and things from the early empire seem to be written from the villas around Rome. And I'm particularly studying this little nexus down at the end of this road that's coming down here to Laurentum, the traditional place where Aeneas landed in Italy. Laurentum and Lavinium That's got its own private road right up to the Palatine Hill, and Augustus probably did spend quite a lot of time down there. That's another ex-Hortensius property, probably. Hortensius' seafront villa. So, lots of possible places to go. He could have gone closer inside, close around the city. This is only half a day's journey. This is a little bit more. You're going to have to stay overnight when you get out here, so you might as well stay for some time. But no, he doesn't do that. Yes, I was just thinking of the number of deities that are all attached to imperial villas around Rome. All the big sanctuaries of Latium have an imperial villa attached to them, practically. And the Tusculum, for instance, has the villa of Tiberius and Julia Augusta, probably somewhere in its area. And this is where the few times when Tiberius comes back from Capri, it's all down in this area here. He gets quite close to Rome. He comes up to this sort of area, and one time he actually goes right up to the gardens of Caesar, almost in the city. But otherwise, yeah, he never comes back from Capri. But he floats around in this area, tempting the Senate to think he's going to go into the city, but he doesn't. So yes, no, he heads off way down south. Now, the imperial family actually owned staging posts all the way down the coast of Italy. They also owned them up north of Rome and all around the Mediterranean. I mean, hundreds of villas that Tiberius must have inherited in AD 14 and Libya. The two which are right up near Rome, you know, when Tiberius sets off for Campania, he usually goes down river and sets sail from Ostia, but he could take a road and go down. Sorry, I can't actually see this on myself somewhere. Anyway, Antium is the first staging post. Every promontory down this coastline has an imperial estate or an imperial villa on it. Every easy citable landmark, so that if you're sailing down the coast, you can find your way very easily all the way. Every, say, Antium, Astura, all these names you always hear about Tiberius either staying there or entertained for dinner. The other emperors, Terracina has a villa of Trajan. Circe, where Circe was thought to inhabit, has a villa of Domitian. Of course, Anzio is known for the great villa of Nero. So the emperors continue to develop all these coastal staging posts constantly throughout time. This is Gaeta. This is the great bay where Formia, and this is a huge promontory, another big villa on it, and Formia too. And inland from these, there's an imperial estate here, which probably connected up with Livia's maternal family up at Fundi. And that all this area, this is where the famous villa of Sperlonga is, that features so prominently in a lot of the accounts of the villas of Tiberius. All this coastline absolutely solid with villas that he could have chosen. He probably owning masses of in the family. Yeah, we know that from an inscription naming a person who's a procurator of elephants at Laurentum. He was also the procurator of the imperial estates at Formia and Gaeta. So yes, all the way down this coast, the wall paintings of Pompeii give us a fantastic insight into what it looked like. It's mostly purely luxury otium type buildings. They're all supported by massive estates inland, which are going to produce all the food and the resources that keep the villas going. But the whole point about them is that they don't really do anything except for entertain, except they can't resist breeding fish in them in enormous quantities. It's almost sort of hundreds of fish ponds, and a great competitive pisciculture, or pisciculture was the great competition in the 1st century BC, oysters and fish, all the way down these villas. And there's a lovely picture of one. They've all got nice quays and jetties and so on. And you're obviously meant to sail up and down the coast, just as the emperors did constantly. So yeah, you get right down to the Bay of Naples. And so this is the coastline here. All this is villas all the way down here. Lots of great men of the Republic, Lucullus and so forth, are when they retreat here, they have multiple villas. They've got 2 or 3, 4, maybe. Lucullus has one at Naples. He's got one at Misenum or Bauli, Baiae, later big imperial one. This is where Tiberius decides to set up shop. He's already got lots of promontory villas, as I say, all the way down the coast. So most of the headlands are taken over by the imperial family. He's got Pausilypon, which is one of the really big promontories on the Bay of Naples. This is the one that Vettius Pollio, this wealthy freedman who threw slaves to his lampreys in his fish ponds. His fish ponds are all around here on the bottom of the promontory. This is a fantastic place that Augustus actually got rid of Vettius Pollio's other bequests to him and turned them over to public use. He did keep Pausilypon. He clearly did rather fancy that one, and in fact it remained in imperial hands thereafter, right until quite late in antiquity. It's a very large villa with theatres and all sorts of other facilities, but presumably Tiberius didn't want that one. There's the view from Pausilypon. It's now a public park. You can go and visit it. Lucullus's villas in the distance here. This is the Bay of Puteoli and Baiae. Fantastic landscape. I mean, if you're going to retreat and retire anywhere, this is where you do it, because the bay in those days, of course, was absolutely full of ships and action. Nowadays, there's not a boat to be seen except for ferries, but in antiquity, the sort of view, this is the headland of Pausilypon with an island with the fish tanks are all around here. And in the distance, you can see Capri. And so this is Tiberius could actually see Pausilypon from Capri, just as he could see Misenum from Capri, he could see Naples from Capri, he could see Pompeii from Capri, he can see Sorrento from Capri. He's in the centre of everything there, and he's got control of all the imperial properties around about the bay. And this is what I think, this sort of island fish pond set up is all the sort of thing that he's in. So we finally got to Capri, sorry, and very, very quickly. The whole point is that actually Capri is a functioning alternative to the Palatine Hill in Rome. It actually looks slightly like the Capitoline Hill, and it has got 2 villas at either end, and it's got a port, and it's got a seafront villa here. And that there's a sort of main residential part of the island in the middle. Augustus has set this all up, built all these villas. He has Capri for 20-odd years. Sorry, no, longer, 40 years. Tiberius really only has it for about 20, and only 10 that he's living there. So most of the villas we see on the island seem to have been built by Augustus, and they were ready-made, and Tiberius, as far as we know, is loath to spend any money on anything, and so presumably doesn't really go out of his way to build any more, though he may well add various bits and pieces to them. But yes, you've got a villa at one end here and another villa at the other end, but this is the real nucleus of the island, and this has got more villas than the rest. It's got its own port, it's got its own harbour, it's connected with Rome. He can send his letters off in the morning and probably get an answer by the following afternoon. So he's basically using this as the Palatine Hill, as far as I can see. And his villas, there's his coastal villa down by the port. This is probably the heart, this is the real villa of Tiberius, which is presumably where he administers the empire from. This is where his postal system comes and goes, and this is where all his other staff are based. This is a very big platform villa with all around. The whole problem of choosing Capri was mad because it hasn't got any water. So they've got to collect all the water and store it in big cisterns or bring it in by ship. And this is a very unusual aspect of this choice. I mean, they could have been on the mainland. Clearly he's choosing this for other reasons, and he's prepared to put up with the fact that he hasn't got any water supply. So all these villas are actually mostly constructed on the top of whacking great water tanks, and then they've got their own baths and fish ponds, and the port is down there. And from it, well, it looks a little bit, I think, probably must have looked a bit like the villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum. And statues from the villa found are actually of the same, the 2 examples of marble peplos wearing figures, which are the same as the dancing maidens from the villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum. So this is the same sort of villa. That's a seafront, directly on seafront, gardens, peristyles, lots of statuary. it's got bases to do with worship of, this is the cult of Ceres. Each of these villas has been given a name of a god by 18th century scholarship, on the sort of understanding that they were all called after gods, and therefore there was Jupiter and Ceres and Venus and so forth. I don't think there's any real foundation for this belief whatsoever. It seems to be a misreading of the sources, which actually just says that they had names. It doesn't actually say that they were named after the gods. So that's the one. He's got proper working farms. This is pigsties and stable blocks. A villa which has been recently excavated and then reburied just inland from the port. So here one called Gasto, built in the sort of cusp of the 1st century BC AD. And then on the other side of the island, so you've got a sort of one northward facing environment for the summertime, and then in the wintertime you go to the other side of the island for the milder climate, and the nowadays Piccola Marina and so on. Another villa, big villa called Castiglione, which has got lots of fantastic marble floors have been found there. So he's got those two. And this extraordinary thing in the British Museum, which is that Hamilton collection, which is a pedestal base with Apollo and Diana, and identical to the ones from Rome. This is clearly there must be a temple of Apollo and Diana on the island, perhaps for Tiberius's home from home, or Rome from Rome. And there is possibly one of the Quindicum via Sacris Faciundis at sacrifice on the same pedestal. And it's perhaps one of a set like the ones from Rome, which seem to be associated with temples. And then a fragment of a relief like the one from Rome, the Albani relief. We've got a fragment of a similar relief from Capri. All the art world is exactly that of Rome and what we see in Rome. So finally get to this one. This is just, you know, a dining villa. It's an extra villa on the end of the peninsula with a fantastic view towards Sorrento. There it is up on its hilltop. And again, it's just essentially massive water tanks storing water up on the top of the hill. But this has been reconstructed by the man who studied the Villa of House of Tiberius in Rome, Clemens Krauss, and he's turned it into a House of Tiberius on Capri, which I quite like, but I think it's a bit exaggerated. There's a massive sort of 6-story palace. Most of the 6 stories are simply the substructures, and the villa really only had one peristyle court layer at the top with the water tanks supporting it. This is where Tiberius is meant to have thrown people off the cliff. So presumably this is his Tarpeian rock. So if he's going to sacrifice people, he's imported the Capitoline Hill literally and just throws them off, because he's got sailors stationed down below, just like in Rome, to make sure if you didn't die, you were executed properly. Yeah. So there's this villa is not anything special. It's actually the same type of panoramic villa you put on promontories everywhere to get a panoramic view. That's what it's all really about. It's often presented as if it's a sort of Colditz castle, but in fact it's just simply strategically positioned, just like even the prison islands. This is Pandateria has one panoramic villa for Julia, presumably when she was exiled there. And then the Villa Farnesina in Rome on the bank of the Tiber, same thing. So there's the marbles from it and fantastic reliefs, all celebrating Bacchic lifestyle, lovely Augustan, Tiberian possibly things. These are all basins for water and wellheads. They're all to do with the sort of luxury of having these extraordinary system of water. Yeah, this is another one in the British Museum with Hercules and Omphale. And Bacchic consumed. So there's, and then the last one, yeah, it's right on the far end of the island out here, Damacuta. Another one with these panoramic dining hall, which looks right across the Bay of Naples over to Misenum, and it's got this little cache of statues. And all around the bottom of the island, all these grottos with dining rooms in them, beautiful grottos. The Blue Grotto here has a great statue group of Tritons and Neptune dancing around in it. And then this one here, the Arsenal, is below Castiglione Villa. Oh no, sorry, this is not Arsenal, this is the one below the Villa of Tiberius, Jovis. All dressed up with mosaics and fancy marbles. These are dining caverns, and they've got their dining rooms with a view and with a nice cool climate, some for the summer, some for the winter. This is a huge one with a big circular pool inside it with dining, with places for sculptures to be set, and this is exactly like the Villa at Spelonga. It's actually the same dimensions and so on. So either Tiberius is copying the one at Spelonga, or they're both built by the same staff. I'm not actually convinced that the villa at Spelonga is Tiberius's villa. I don't think we've got any evidence to prove it one way or the other. But it is interesting, yes, to think of whether he, in fact, did occasionally entertain the idea of actually developing some of the other villas on the coast, or to visit them. Yeah, the problem with this one being the villa of Tiberius, where Sejanus saves him, is that it's not in the right place and it's not of the right date, and the sculptures are probably post-Tiberian. So I'm afraid you have to forget Spelonga. Okay, so all that stuff is fantastic, but it's somebody else's probably. It's not to be trying to interpret it as some weird sort of mania of Tiberius. This is some other really smart person, who's setting it up. Okay, so that's, I hope, the end. Rome to Capri was not Tiberius withdrawing. Tiberius making his life fantastic after what he saw as a life of complete sacrifice and toil and torture. He goes to Capri to basically live the life of the optimate, as he feels it's the thing, and leave the population of Rome to their own devices, as Peter said. Sorry, I've gone on too long. So stop. Well, thank you very much for that fascinating story.